Welcome back to the Razor X tutorial series. Don Garbutt here. In this tutorial, we're going to look into the sample and hold section of Razor X. Sample and hold will provide a series of stepping values which will control parameters in your synth. In a minute, I'll show you how to assign the sample and hold to a target parameter. The sample and hold can also interact with the animator pad. So first we'll take a look at the actual process of sample and hold. Measurements of an input signal are made by a steadily repeating clock oscillator. The hold part of sample and hold is that each value is held until the next clock pulse. The choice of input content and its frequency will have a heavy bearing on the results that we get from the sample and hold. If we choose noise as an input, we'll get a constantly random string of values. If we use a low-frequency oscillator as the input, then we'll get a string of values that seem to follow the pattern of the wave shape itself, essentially quantizing the waveform. Using sync settings for these LFOs enable repeating patterns. Variations of the frequencies of the two oscillators can come up with some very interesting patterns as well. These patterns can change steadily if the oscillators are not running in any kind of sync mode. Razor X has a folder for sample and hold patches. There are also sample and hold patches found in the combined modulators and the initialization patches folder. The first patch in the initialization patches folder shows the gate pulsar in action. In an earlier tutorial, I mentioned how the gate pulsar fires envelope generators. If we go to the second initialization patch, you'll hear the gate pulsar firing 16th note pulses, but you'll hear quarter note movement coming out of the sample and hold. Here we have a slow rising sawtooth wave being sampled by the clock rate of the clock LFO. As it samples every quarter note, you hear a value derived from the position of the LFO. Now let's go to initialization preset number 6. In the last example, we only used one LFO, and it was a rising sawtooth wave. This preset has switched LFO 1 to a square wave, and has LFO number 2 creating a falling sawtooth wave that runs once every quarter note. On the sample and hold input mixer, we can control the blend of LFOs with movement on the x-axis. That was LFO 1, the square wave. Now if we move over to LFO 2 position, we hear the sampling of a higher speed LFO sawtooth wave. What we can do now is blend the two. So you can imagine by setting different rates on the different LFOs and different wave shapes that you could come up with some interesting cyclic patterns. A third option on the sample and hold input mixer is to add noise into the blend. So what we have here is the ability to add randomness by going up the y-axis. That way we can get the orderliness of cyclic LFOs mixed in with random values coming from sampling the noise generator. Depending on how you set the noise generator, you can come up with more divergent values. It's also worth noting that you can create unipolar output from these sample values. I happen to have the LFOs and the noise generator set to produce only positive values. You can select unipolar or bipolar on each of the LFOs and the noise generator. This way you can blend in the polarity of the values that you're creating. Here you can see in this example that the cutoff point is now moving in a positive and negative manner. So that's it for this part of the demonstration, showing the blending of inputs for the sample and hold process. In the examples that you've heard so far, sample and hold has been controlling the cutoff point of the low-pass filter. It's actually assignable to any of the controllable parameters in Razor. If we select the Modulation Input Select button here, you'll see that what I've done is taken the off button and replaced it with the sample and hold source. So that's what this selection is here. In this way, any of the modulation rings can activate the amount of sample and hold input, with the positive or negative interpretation. The sample and hold process is polyphonic. Each note starts its own cycle independent of the others. The first example is a chord where all notes begin at the same time. In the second example, the note arrival times are staggered. You can choose whether you want the LFOs to sync to a note-on message, or if you just want them to follow the clock of your digital audio workstation. Then you'll find that the cycles of the clock pulsar and the LFOs ignore note-on messages. That way you can have notes playing at whatever speed you like, and the pattern of the sample and hold stays the same. So we'll be able to get some interesting control stuff out of the sample and hold circuit. Another instrument that has an incredible sample and hold department is Garbutt's Factory. So I recommend that you take a look at Garbutt's Factory and how they've implemented sample and hold. In the continuing series of Razor X tutorial videos, you'll see how the sample and hold and the animated pad talk very well together. We'll be able to supply cyclic patterns to the animated pad positions, which opens up incredible possibilities with Razor X. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.